Yeah, I have a degree from MSU, and I also teach 3 classes there. And the 3 classes that I teach there are all site construction, engineering related.
Somehow, somebody mentioned.
He makes this.
One of his fastest ones. Divided house. Depends on what season. When he gets to brag about what.
Exactly.
California.
It's nice to meet you.
Even I'm used to this. Yeah.
Great. You're here. I was just.
Now that they're on video, you hate to sit there the whole meeting.
So I can like really talk.
I think it'd be funny to change it and see if anybody noticed. Something probably no one would notice.
She's better eyes than I do.
It's like my wife, I don't know if you might know Dana. She's a landscape architect.
I've heard of her, okay.
Yeah, so she's been winding her business down for like 7 years. But it's flaring.
That was like Neil Marcellus retiring for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
He finally just.
He finally did.
He finally just said, stop calling. Yeah, and very politely.
Yeah, but you know, it took him a while to get out the door.
Yeah, we kept bugging him.
Do you come in and out on the same day?
Yeah.
How many more years do you have?
Well, at least 2. Yeah, at least 3 years of working.
Just to fill.
In the one day?
Dead winter.
Did you get here like just now-ish?
Did
Did you get here?
I was in town about 4 o'clock.
That's a career.
Okay.
What the heck? That's it.
It's getting weird with me, and I'm now in the age not
What that, right?
I'm the age
Whatever time
people
you
who yeah, that's
This is probably better. Be at home.
yeah, 6 years.
Yeah.
I would.
Yes.
But I've been doing that.
Right, so it's,
I moved home.
it's no big deal. It's the farmer's.
It's getting a little excited.
Is it? Oh,
I was just
okay.
traveling through, I'm New York, but I'm over to California here. Grad school.
Yeah.
And I stopped here. I never used it.
I used it.
It's a great place to get started. Yeah.
I just got.
All right.
That was
Everything
it.
going on.
Yeah, I don't think there was gonna be.
Photos?
No, there were no photos. Okay.
Well, that's great. That's true.
It's great times, yeah.
Okay. Looked like.
Excited, thank you.
Have you been asked?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And my mission between now and when we open the meeting is to get the name right, so.
Great to meet you.
First of all,
Thank you. Yeah.
From what I can tell. I think we.
Can you get through okay? Great, thank you.
No personal.
Oh, Vic. Yeah, I was gonna say, I drove by the city.
Oh, this is paper.
I threw something together.
That was so good.
I was like, that looks like real deal.
From 20 feet away. You
You're
can't
20
tell.
feet out.
I think it's over here.
It's just got a point.
It's got the texture and everything. It looks like woody, you know, like the old fashioned one.
Well, it's my printer slowly dying.
Is it losing its ink? Yeah.
Yeah.
George, you move
inside?
Usually, yeah.
Short dress work.
Yeah.
5:27.
I was good, I was good.
Oh, thank you.
I can approximate the face that has the hands.
Oh, you're
Check it out
thinking
who's here.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, I know.
I was
At least you have an option.
Yes.
Yeah, you can see.
Are we missing a chair?
Look there.
I
It should
think it might be
the same,
one
but
more
I don't
ahead.
know.
Yeah. You know, normally we have one.
Look at this. Oh, I see. I figured I decided that a while ago.
Yeah.
Waiting.
These chairs.
They get borrowed.
Comfortable to get borrowed by staff.
Well, I think they were having a meeting regarding the software.
Oh, yeah.
My brother's desk, so there were a couple of extra chairs there.
That had to be exciting. $58 for Deegan to make it through the door.
Right, might make it. He sprints across the finish line.
But he doesn't have anywhere to
Jack, is that
sit.
a Boston Marathon, emblem I see perhaps?
You.
Jack, how are you? How are you?
Got $20 for asking.
Welcome. Seemed natural. We should.
Yeah, right. That wasn't staged at all.
Well, four
30
showed
seconds.
up and,
No, but they.
oh, they canned the game, I know.
Okay. Waiting for me to shut up.
No, we-
Nice haircut, Al.
10 seconds, thank you.
Oh, it is short.
It is short.
It's nice.
Call the meeting to order. I'll jump by 10 seconds.
Fine.
Yeah, everybody doesn't want to sit here and watch us count. Could you call the roll?
Yep, Vanessa Warren, our new member.
Here,
Welcome.
thank you.
Emily DeVay,
Here.
Jack Deegan. Here. George Peak. Yeah. Bill Mulder. Here. Mark Uday. Here. Andrew Bowman.
Here.
Al Dyke. Here. And our student representative, Max Bassett, said that he's got a tennis practice, but he'll be joining us via Zoom at 6.
We have to make sure it shows up. Okay, before we move to the approval of the minutes, just Vanessa, was she sworn in? Okay. So we're not- yeah, here. Great, welcome. Thank you for volunteering, being commandeered, however, so appreciate it. Moving on to the minutes of the October 7th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Are there any questions or corrections? I thought they looked all right. Okay. Make a motion to approve. Motion's been made to approve. We have support.
I second that.
I think the runner.
Who was the second? Emily?
Emily.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Moving on to public comment and correspondence. Is there anyone here this evening for something that's not on the agenda?
I'm assuming that would be me. Did you say that was on the agenda about the signage on the buildings?
It is not on the agenda.
Okay.
So yes, now would be
That would
your,
be me.
Okay.
I apologize, I made copies and Chief add a few for me. I don't know if you need this, I'm sorry.
And Jeff, could you just give us a brief reason that are we gonna see a new item or are we just?
this is just public comment section.
Okay.
And I kind of briefly talked about this a little bit before, we just haven't put it on the agenda yet. She's the new business owner up on the corner of Lake and State.
Okay.
And the signage regulations there only permit one wall sign on the building and one freestanding sign, which which is the issue with the B1 and B2, just limitation on the number of signs.
Okay.
So she's here because she has, she just wants to talk about looking into the future of.
Okay, I guess we have items on the agenda that people have, submitted applications, paid fees, and are here to wait. I guess if this is something that's gonna be time consuming,
It should only take me like 2 minutes.
Okay.
That's why I kind of pretty easy to get quick and
Great.
painless.
Sometime, and not you personally, but sometimes these
I'm not long.
grow into and I feel bad for folks who are as nervous as I am to talk in public and want to get it over with.
That would be me.
Okay.
That would be me. As a matter of fact, I walked in and panicked because I didn't realize there were so many of you here.
That's all right.
Yes, he's the chief had many more copies for me.
Great.
So just real quick, Mr. Grimm and I had a conversation regarding the signage for the building, and it appears that whatever is in existence now is pretty outdated and doesn't take into account for businesses that are located on corners like that. So if I can only put one sign on the building, it's not gonna properly sign the business for both sides. So I was just hoping to basically get it out there that, if we could do some updating on that and allow the signage, you can see here what I was trying to do. I was just gonna put a small sign out the side of the building on Lake Street that would be two-sided. That would allow traffic coming from both directions to see what, that there's a business there. And IGA's got one, but currently, apparently, that's not allowed.
And Jeff, this sort of went back to your comment, now I'm remembering the other meeting where we updated the sign ordinance in the central business district, but not necessarily B1 and B2.
Correct.
Okay, yes. And as far as what we can do tonight, would it be to put something on the agenda for next month to take a look at B1 and B2? We probably couldn't take action beyond that.
We have that as a topic. I didn't include it on this agenda because we already had 4 or 5 items and it was looking like a long meeting. But we absolutely can put this on the agenda for discussion to make adjustments in those other districts. We had another similar situation with a property owner below the bluff in B1 that had similar limitation on the number of signs they could do. So.
Well, thank you for bringing it to our attention, because it
absolutely.
probably is something that we tend to focus on CBD because that's where the majority of it is. We
Absolutely.
don't leave anybody out, so.
Yeah, but this allows you at least to kind of get an idea of what I was requesting, and just so that you understand, this was what was approved, so that is the only sign I have currently. So that's what that references, but the other one is what I was hoping to do. Okay?
And does anyone, while she's here, does anyone have any questions?
Are you open yet?
No,
Okay.
I was kind of hoping to get this accomplished beforehand, and I think when I spoke with you, the thought was that this was already on the agenda for the harbor design people would have the same issue that you were referring to. So that's why I showed up tonight, because I thought it was already on the agenda for them. So
And what's your name?
Anita Kuzno, I apologize. I literally would have introduced myself, but the conversation went to Mr. Grimm.
Well, welcome. I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. I'm excited. So thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming, and we'll definitely take this up next meeting.
I'll keep this, and when we add it to the agenda, I'll make sure to include it as some thoughts of what couldn't be done that would like to be done for discussion topic at that time.
Thank you.
Any other comments or correspondence for items not on the agenda or on the agenda? Correspondence. Okay. Moving on to new and old business. Public hearing for the special land use at 3 Beach Drive. Everything, all the materials were in our packet. Dan Gorman, I believe, is here, probably on behalf of the applicant.
Yes, sir.
And
It has been a little while since we've had one, so just to remind me, we need a motion to open up the public hearing.
so we have a motion to open the public hearing.
I so move.
Support?
Support. Second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Open the public hearing, as exciting as that is. Dan, did you want us to do a quick run through of what's being asked?
Sure, we're asking for a special land use on a garage area. What it prompts us in the city of Harbor Springs, you can't put a garage in a front yard. And this property happens to have 2 front yards, even though we have identified Beach Street as the front. So we're here asking for this accessory building to be built, put in the front yard. what it's size-wise is shown on the plans. There will be living quarters up above. We haven't developed that yet, but that'll be coming in. I understand that this will encompass all of that approval, so we don't have to come back for a special land use living above the garage. So that's what I'm doing here.
And Larry, the clarification might have been, that was one question I had, because I think it, in the original part of the application, it referenced the second story of the garage as being for future resident, which is fine, but it's
Right.
nice to know it's now, so we can do it all at once as opposed to subsequently, but you prepared a memo in response. And
Yes, I did. Want me to briefly go through it?
I guess we do that, and then we can see if there's any other public comment, and we can close the public hearing we discussed.
The property is located at 3 Beach Drive, which literally is just down there. Okay. There's a new home going up, and they want to put a garage with future guest quarters on the frontage of Pennsylvania Avenue, which is really their rear yard. And because of the big cedar hedge that's there, you'll never see this building. As I went by it this afternoon, made that observation. Basically, though, property is zoned residential, which is R1A, and it has the same regulations as a lot of the zoning districts do, in that a 2-story accessory building requires special land use. Not so much if it's in the front yard,
Okay.
but rather that it's because you meet the front yard setback actually.
Right.
And it's because it's 2-story. And as a guest quarters in the R1A district, that does not require a special land use in that zoning district. But there are several zoning regulations that do come into play, and I have reviewed those. It meets all the setback requirements, and I'm assuming you guys have read all of this. The footprint of the accessory building shall not exceed 75% of the main building's footprint. Basically, the accessory building is 1,590 square feet, but the house footprint is 7,600 square feet, and so that equates to only 21%. So that's not a problem in this situation. The accessory building cannot be taller than 25 feet. This is 24 feet 10 inches, just under, but it works. Can have more than 2 accessory buildings. This will be the only accessory building on the property, so they've met that standard. Utilities need to be worked out to this building, and they can do that through the city manager. They're asking for the special land use, as I noted. They have provided a summary of statements regarding the special land use and how they meet those standards, which I've encouraged you to read. I've gone through the review criteria for a site plan and provided my commentary to that. This is going to have a curb cut on Pennsylvania Avenue for its access, but it's an existing curb cut, so there would be nothing new in a traffic pattern there or have any impact, in my opinion, on pedestrian traffic. The finish of this building is going to be the same as the house. They're going to mirror each other in terms of styles, which is one of the criteria. Basically, is compliant with all the dimensional standards in the R1A district, and they've answered and addressed all of the final criteria and criteria of a special land use, which, if you want, I thought it met it just fine, but you each have to come to that conclusion too. Based on all that information that I've just summarized real quickly, the standards of a guest quarters found in section 3021D1, D through L, have been met by the applicant, as we've discussed in this memo. The site plan standards found in section 2001-1A through C, in my opinion, have been met, but you have to draw that same conclusion. And the special use standards found in section 2100-1 through 7, as addressed by the application and applicant, and you need to draw the same conclusion, are compliant. I don't have any reason to suggest a condition for this. You may, or public comment may, bring that forward. But I would suggest you look at this from a positive standpoint. Mr. Chair.
Are there any members of the public that have questions regarding the application, or has there been any correspondence other than what may have been in the packet, which I don't think there were? And are we, forget every month, are we taking comments still on through virtual means?
Yes, we are, but there's none.
I do have one item. Dan was kind enough to email me. So Weekly Landowners Association, they also do site plan reviews on any projects within the organization. And Dan gave me a copy of the letter stating that they have reviewed the plan and that it meets their requirements.
Yes, if we don't have any other public comments, would we have a motion to close the public hearing and then start discussion at the planning commission?
I move to close the public hearing, start discussion.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Everyone had a chance to review everything. Does anyone on the planning commission have questions for the applicant or for Larry or staff?
Dan, the address is 3 Beach Drive, right? And
Correct.
so you declared that's your front yard on this project, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that'll be the
But
address.
is it coincidentally 3 Pennsylvania Drive too? Does that have a?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Pennsylvania seems more of a 4-digit
Yeah.
number and everything.
Okay. And is it a single lot at this point, or are there?
It is a single lot now. It's been combined.
It has been combined already. Okay.
Extra agenda. Any other comments or questions for the applicant or Larry? I'm sorry, any thoughts on the site plan?
No, Larry did a great job, dumbing it down for us.
They make this job harder.
Makes it easy.
I personally feel it meets all the standards, and I think it's interesting. The one thing I wanted Larry to clarify is this is actually was a special land use for the second story, not the use being a guest quarters, because in R1A and E, I think it is, that's a use by right.
That is correct.
Okay. So what we're determining is that all the standards have been met to make this a 2-story accessory building instead of a 1-story.
But it meets the height requirement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Height requirement for an accessory building is 25 feet, and they're just 2 inches under that.
It does meet the, even though, because this is a rear yard, but it actually meets a setback that exceeds what it would be required.
That is correct.
With no further comments, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
That was Al, that's second.
Yeah, Al. Jeff, if you would call the roll whenever you're ready.
May I just inject just for a second? Mark, was your motion as per the suggested findings in my memo? Yes, those 3 items?
Yes.
Okay. And Al, were your second supported that? Okay, thank you.
Roll call vote. George Pete,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Mark Bidet,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
Al Dyken,
Yes.
Vanessa Warren,
Yes.
Emily Dubé,
Yes.
Jack Deegan.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Moving on to site plan review for 138 3rd Street. This is a, I got that right. Yes, 138 3rd Street is for a temporary structure, tent structure to cover the existing patio. They're not adding a patio, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. It's an existing patio the structure is covering.
I can scroll far enough. And this structure is actually in place currently, and I think it was this summer. Some of these were, I think, allowed during COVID sort of administratively. And I think as in your memo, it makes note that these aren't actually addressed specifically in the zoning code.
That's correct.
Jeff made the determination to come here just for any input.
Well, I think it's a structure, and any structure requires zoning approval. And the way that the zoning code is written, I don't have the authority to grant site plan approval for commercial properties. So with that said, and it's not an awning that is only attached to the building, which we do have regulations in there for that, that when there's a small awning overhanging public sidewalk, I can approve that the same way that I approve signs. So because of that, I just felt that it was beyond my ability to approve administratively, and it needed to come here.
So everyone's had a chance to review the memo, the drawings. I had a little trouble seeing some of the line drawing, the pencil drawing on that. But the picture certainly helped. Does anyone have any questions for Jeff or Larry? Or is there anyone here representing the applicant? Larry, did you have any concerns? I don't see any noted in your memo. Again, it's not increasing the use because the seating has already been approved as part of the original site plan.
Yes,
Correct.
there's really virtually no impact on that third paragraph. I come to the conclusion that the public will not be harmed by the proposed temporary canopy. The canopy will not obstruct view. It does not appear to impact the public health, safety, and welfare of the community, nor does it create a more intense operation of the restaurant facility that's there. So I've suggested a positive motion to approve the seasonal canopy for the lounges that exist today.
I guess one thing that may have been absent in the application was really, seasonal. We don't have it, obviously they probably aren't gonna leave it up during the winter. We don't have any firm date where it's gonna go up or down. So that's a concern of it. I can't imagine people sitting out there in the winter. And it is all on the applicant's property. It's not in a public right of way or.
That is correct.
Questions on this one?
I have a question maybe for Larry and Jeff. If we were to grant approval tonight, does this approval go forward in perpetuity? Or is there a sunset date or?
I guess we would run with the land. That's a good point. If the business were to change, it's now 138.
Well, if they had a change of use in the proposed new use had an outdoor seating area, this tent would be approved as part of that. Because we don't require a new use to come in and get new approval. And so the approvals granted on the property stay with the property.
It raises one question. If this changed from food service to a retail, would a retail establishment be able to put goods underneath the tent?
The same rules and regulations would apply for an outdoor sales area as they would anywhere else in that zone district.
It's not considered a structure. It's not indoors. So
That's correct.
So
Yes, that's still an outdoor area.
Questions, concerns?
I have none. I'd move to approve. Do we need to motion this, Jeff?
It's a site plan, so I would think motion to approve the site plan.
I would move to approve the site plan per the recommendations of Larry Nix and as outlined in his memorandum.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
All those, roll call, sorry.
Vanessa Warren,
Yes.
Emily Dubay,
Yes.
Jack Deegan,
Yes.
George Peak,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Mark Bidet,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
Al Dyke.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Moving on to the topic of the day, tents. We have another tent application. Going into the fall, that's when these all come out. From Tom Troutman from Irish representing the yacht club. And again, this tent is covering a patio, existing patio, actually another existing tent that was allowed during COVID, I believe, and asking to make it more of a permanent approval, not increasing seating or intensity of use. A good memo from Larry and Thomas here. If you have any questions for him? One question I had, I think it's pretty well answered. percent coverage of the lot, not that that's necessarily a standard in this, but I mean, the parking lot all remains open. That looks to be more or less, if you have that survey drawing. It's not 50% of the property is parking lot, but probably 40. So I don't think we're on any case of having a percent coverage that would be greater than. It's not a permanent structure, but just looking at it. And has there haven't been any comments from neighboring properties?
Yes and no. So one, I guess this started with, during COVID, they came to us and said, hey, can we do this because we have to limit our capacity, and this is a way for us to maintain some capacity. During that COVID time, the city said, sure, let's do this on a temporary basis. We had the discussion with them earlier this summer that it looks like they want to continue to do this, past the COVID restrictions. So we said that they should come to the planning commission for further review. There were some, I don't want to say complaints, there were some concerns by a neighbor, whether it met zoning or not. Not really complaining, I wouldn't say. And we just said that we were in the process of working with them to get it approved through the proper channels.
And during the time that it's been up, there haven't been complaints about the patio use, because the patio preceded the tent by quite a while.
Yeah. No, I have not received any complaints about its use.
Does anyone have any questions for Larry or Jeff or Tom?
Well, with that being the case, I'd move similarly as to the other tent, which Larry said there was no real rationale to deny the request. I would so move to grant this request.
Second.
Thank you, Mark.
Roll call, please.
Al Dyken,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
Mark Bidet,
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
George Pete.
Yes.
Jack Deegan,
Yes.
Emily DeBay,
Yes.
Vanessa Warren.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, is the report from the subcommittee that was put together to sort of summarize the input we've received on short-term rentals and how we move forward with those. There's a good opening paragraph put together, 1 through 6, sort of brings us up to date as to the input we've received and the things that have been done, but I thought I'd turn over to Bill, who sort of chaired the subcommittee, and have him run through this. And just for clarification for tonight, being a big topic, and we sort of just thought of the subcommittee that in order to get actionable items that we could talk about and break this into 2 parts. Tonight, we would potentially focus more on the recommendation, and then the additional items that are sort of more macro ideas. What are the long-term impacts? This group of ideas we brought forward tonight for discussion is really more focused on behavioral issues, if you want to call them that. The next portion of this would be if the planning commission chooses to take up a discussion of kind of the macro issues of short-term rentals and how they impact communities. So for tonight's purposes, we're going to focus our discussions on sort of the behavioral part, and then it is on the agenda for next month to take comment and decide how we want to proceed with any more. So, Bill.
All right, this is to summarize where we've been on the short-term rental issue. It's been an issue of growing concern in the community over the last few years, and not only our community, but many communities around the world. And we have had a number of people address city council asking for improvement and action on short-term rentals. Had articles in the paper, and you can just feel the intensity in the community building on the issue. So we sought to address it by getting some input, and we did that on August 24th with our community input meeting. And we did that as part of the master plan, under the master plan umbrella. But it's out of that popped some actionable items that we thought made sense to address sooner than just putting it in the master plan. And the subcommittee then took the suggestions that were made in that public input session. We categorized those. We extracted some of the ideas that we thought were most effective and actionable. We actually rated them on effectiveness and ease of and speed of implementation, and picked out some responses that we thought were going to be the most effective and the quickest to implement. And we distilled those down to what you see here as a recommendation. And then we identified 4 more big hitters that are going to take, we think, some more discussion and some more action. And any questions on the process or the timeline? You all have kind of followed along with our reports throughout, so we appreciate that.
And I think, Bill, the one point that really, it's hard to believe when we're going into winter, not coming out of it, is something that sort of came to our realization during the subcommittee meetings is we really don't have till May or June. We really have till January when the licenses for short-term rentals would start being available for which people could apply. So that was part of the reason for really breaking this in half and taking the things that we feel are doable and before it's so just from a timing standpoint, it was really August was the public input session. September was the first planning commission meeting. After that, we formed the subcommittee, and I think it's October. So we've that, and it was odd as we all sat around and it's getting colder and the days are getting shorter. You think really we only have till January. It's hard to imagine that we don't have 6 months to deal with this. So that's why part of the reason that we sort of try to make it into things that could happen more readily, and that's really January.
Great point. Yep. So the community is actually asking us to take action to begin to address the issue that is causing a lot of consternation. And so we came up with, I think, 6 responses that we believe can be implemented in time for the January 1st licensing of short-term rentals. And the first one is to streamline the city's enforcement process, to speed up the hearings, speed up the notification of owners when there's a problem. And that's one of the main things that people in the community have raised to us is, this could take, months and months and years to even surface a problem. So we heard it, and we believe that we can significantly speed that up. And, we're asking staff to come up with a recommendation about exactly how that would run. Another one is to develop a Be a Good Neighbor campaign for renters. So this is actually potentially a public communications campaign with, all the media that we can muster with some key messages that people would see to think about how their behavior as renters would impact their neighbors and the community. And I think we could make it pretty hard hitting and pretty effective. Really make it polite and nice, but not really pull any punches and tell people about, what the fact that they're renting and how it impacts their neighbors and neighborhoods. Another one is to get really specific with our hosts and to tell them about what the expectations are from the city and what the best practices are to be a host in the short-term rental world. And there are some various opinions, I think, and various ways that hosts operate. And I think we could really clarify what the best practices would be and what a respectful and beneficial approach would be for their neighbors. And then in our session, one of the community members mentioned we had to take a look at Palm Springs, California as a benchmark for how they deal with short-term rentals. And they have a number of aspects, but one of the things they have is a brochure that's mandatory. It's handed out to every rental group that checks into a short-term rental. And I believe it's very effective. Today, we give out a list of our ordinances, and it's dry and it's difficult to read. And I think we could have a much harder hitting one. And they start out, saying that you're renting a house in the neighborhood, in some of our nicest neighborhoods in the city. And here's what we expect of you. And so I think we could benchmark and take some of the thoughts from Palm Springs, California on this issue. They're 49 times bigger than we are, but they've done some good work here. So I think that could be really effective. And then Victor and Jeff think it would be effective to review our ordinances on nuisance. So fireworks, trash, and other things, to make sure that those are stated exactly the way that we think would be most effective and that they would apply to full-time residents as well as renters of any kind. So probably, an hour's worth of work to really brush that up. And if they come up with anything, they'll tell us about their recommendations. And then the same with, probably is a good idea to take a look at our definitions of hotel, motel, inn, bed and breakfast, and those kinds of things to make sure that there's, make sure that it applies properly in this new world of short-term rentals. And then the final thing would be to probably modestly raise the short-term rental license fee for 2022. And again, any fee that the city charges has to be supported on a cost basis. And so that the fees would cover our existing process as well as some of these new things, or in fact, all of these new things. So in summary, we think these are some quick hit items that could be effective, and they could be implemented at zero cost to the city and the residents. And we can get those in motion for January 1st.
What is the fee for a short-term rental license fee?
$250.
$250?
Yep.
All right.
Per year, $250 per year.
Is that something, so these fees, is that, like if you go to Palm Springs and, I have an 11,000 square foot home, is the fee $250 the same as if you've got a 2,500 square foot home?
I don't know their fee structure.
And I think, George, part of it is the fees, because and Victor can answer this better, but the fee has to be based on, the revenue generated by the fee has to be based on an actual cost. So it has to balance,
Got it.
If
We can do zoning fees based on square footage, for example. That's how we do, like, you can make zoning application fees based on square footage, but not application fee for a standard license that is reviewed and valued the same way for each owner. So if we had a different, for example, if we had a different structure for evaluating square footage of short-term rentals, then perhaps we could have a different structure, fee schedule, but we don't. It's the same standards for each house, whether it's 1,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet.
And that might even get into, the bigger topics that we want to take up, get these actionable items going as fast as we can for January 1st. If we decided, right now, the zoning code, the short-term rental regulations and licensing process is part of the city code, not the zoning code, and there's some advantages to having it there, which is why it was put there originally by the city. If through this process, one of the ideas in the long term is maybe a rental code for rentals in general. There's some reasons to do it that way, which we can get into next month, but that might end up being the time where maybe you do move it because you have different reasons, and that then you could look at the fees more on a per square foot basis.
And you don't believe that limiting occupancy is an actionable item by January?
It didn't bear out that way in the subcommittee. There's for getting things in the licensing process by January 1st. Part of the idea, one of the major ideas is setting an occupancy for each house, each rental, and putting that on the license. But again, that gets to be an enforcement. We have to think that through more carefully as how do you enforce it?
There's also two other reasons. One is that you have to do a planning commission public hearing and then a council public hearing. So by the time you have these hearings, staff develops an ordinance, revised ordinance, could be November, December, planning commission votes on it, and then council. You're talking about early next year sometime anyway. And the second issue there is council already considered occupancy once before, and they took it out of the original proposal. So we'd have to think more clearly and I guess more specifically on how we would make it work. It would pass the muster for council to approve it.
Yeah, we have to always remember what we're recommending. What we pass here goes to council, the following Monday. So it's a whole nother month, after what we would do. And a lot of the things, if we get into those bigger items, depending on what comes out of Lansing, we may be able to do things more in such a way that they would survive. Lansing making it, preventing cities from regulating short-term rentals on a local basis. But if you developed a rental code for all rentals, that potentially survives that action. So there's good reasons to maybe do it in a way that it affects all rentals, not just short-term for the long run, if Lansing makes those changes. I think that's the way we.
What was the thought?
Chief, real quick, I have to leave. You guys have any questions for me before I leave?
How fast was Martha driving the other day?
No, I sat in on Bill's meeting here. It was very well attended and lots of good feedback. So, but if you have any questions, that's no problem.
Okay.
Good. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Just FYI, Max Bassett has joined us. He is on Zoom, so.
7 minutes late.
Well, he could have been, I just noticed it.
Commission members, I can tell you that there are many in the community who feel that these are not a sufficient response. That it's, we ought to do more faster, and we ought to, really take very, very strong action. And the items that we've identified for additional discussion, we think are probably the most effective and that they do bear some work. And if you're willing to do that over the next couple of months, I think we could present council with some good advice that they could act on. But in the short term, with your concurrence on these immediate responses, we could present these to council and they could consider them.
Good idea. I would move to send this along.
Second that. Are we gonna have any input?
Yes.
Oh, before we do this.
Anytime.
First of all, thank you. This, I think a lot of really good thought and effort went into this from the meeting that was held down to the distillation of this. Just a couple of observations. Review and update fireworks, trash, and other nuisance ordinance. Is that really a short-term quickie? Let's do that in an hour. It doesn't feel like it. And the counter to that would be, and did we feel that they were inadequate before we ran into the short-term rental issue? If they're adequate for the residents of the city, why would they not be? And to me, it gets more back to enforcement and feedback than it does to the ordinance themselves. I'm not saying don't do it, but in the category, and I agree, let's move forward. I mean, let's keep this process, let's build the momentum in the process. That didn't sound like an hour's work to me. The other one is that all of the focus on education and communication, which I think is key, I think is missing one element, and that is this is all from the renter and the renter's perspective. But I've sat in numerous meetings, as have many of you, where the neighbors and the residents come to complain at the specific meeting. But when we say, have you called the police, have you reported it? They say, oh, well, we really didn't want to do that. It was late. I don't want to call 911. Without that educational component and without hard statistics on how many complaints we're actually getting in real time, to me, there's a big missing element here. People need to feel comfortable. If we're a neighbor and not a short-term rental, they'd probably call. Or they go knock next door and say, hey, please, it's late. We need to educate everybody that it's okay. And the chief left, the timing is interesting. They got to call 911. That's what their job is. We're talking about additional enforcement that should come through our normal channels, through the police department. But as we reach out, educate, put together a brochure, let's make sure it includes those that are affected so they feel empowered to call 911 and get the support they need really.
That's a good point. Actually, I think in our one of the subcommittee meetings, we talked about the public hearing or the public forum, how Chief did a good job of encouraging people to do that. And we did actually talk about, well, we got to educate neighborhoods that everybody's hesitant to call 911 just because it seems like it's not really an emergency, but that's really just the way you get in touch with them. So that's a good point.
It's a uniqueness, I think, because I've seen them have, I don't want to call 911. It's not an emergency, but Chief Knight would explain, well, but that's the way you communicate with us. We need to emphasize that message or we'll continue to hear about it sporadically in a meeting where they come to complain.
not that they shouldn't do that, but it should be more real time.
Regarding the review of the nuisance ordinances, I think maybe Andy was being generous with 1 hour's review, but I think it's something that we can start
Bill said
reviewing.
that,
And
not
if we don't, we can start reviewing it. Right now, we don't need to wait for, a long macro discussion to start reviewing it. And then staff can review it. And if we have suggestions, then we can bring those to council for.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And I think.
But you were very specific about we want actionable items for January so we can get moving. I
Well,
don't
we
see a
could-
deliverable there for January.
If there is, that's great. Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily deliverable by January to have a finished result, but I think that part of the reason that we included it there was we felt that it was important to get started on that right away because it really addressed some of the complaints that were coming in. And it addressed the issue where some of the complaints about behavior at a site was not necessarily a violation of something, but it sounded like the people felt like it was something that needed to be addressed. And so starting that discussion now, if we start now, we might not have a finished product that goes through public hearing and is approved within the city code by January. But if it's better to start it now than to start that process in January.
I didn't benefit from all of those discussions. I'm just thinking about deliverables and timeliness. That one's not a short term.
And I think, John, the point, that was sort of, and part of the reason it's at the bottom of the chart is we sort of, this whole topic sort of naturally divides itself from behavioral and then the structural, as Bill was calling, sort of the big issues. But the behavioral stuff, so much of that is just enforcing rules that already exist. And we feel like we have some good rules that can be enforced, but we also thought, geez, we really ought to make sure we have a fresh look at those rules. And if they do need to be amended, because it very quickly turns into, well, if you're enforcing it on one house, do they tend to look down the street and say, well, you're not enforcing it on this one. So we need to just be more aware of what those rules are as we ask, Jeff and Chief to enforce these more aggressively and quickly, it'd be better to have a fresh look.
And we talked about a prime example was on-street parking, and we have no ordinance. We have a lot of complaints about parking on these streets, but we have no ordinance that prohibits parking on the street by anyone. So one of those things is, it could be a quick review. Do we want to establish an ordinance on that or not? And then, yes, it's the process to go to council. But anyway, there's things that we've received, like Jeff was saying, a lot of complaints about that we really just couldn't address with our ordinance.
I think fire pits is one that's sort of not as well defined.
It's not as well defined.
Trash or something. So.
Yeah. Trash as well. Yeah.
Any other public comments? Yes, sir.
Hi, I've got a couple comments first on developing the good neighbor thing. Most of these short-term rentals, my experiences with one on State Street, these people aren't interested in being a good neighbor. They're interested in the cash cow, and that's all they do. The house next to me, they've got a tree that's hanging over other people's yards, and it's endangering their house in windstorms and just causing the roof to deteriorate. So the neighbor asked if he wants to cut some of the branches off that are overhanging his property, and he asked the neighbor if she would like to participate and pay half the cost since it's her tree. And she said no, they have no interest. They don't take care of the property. They've mowed their yard about 5 times this year, and I probably mowed mine 30. And other houses I've seen around the neighborhood, they just don't keep them up. And as far as being a good neighbor with the people that are renting it, it's my understanding that the owners have to provide a list of ordinances and stuff in order to get their license. And so that's already there, and these people aren't looking at it. So it really isn't going to make much difference.
So are you saying we shouldn't do that then, Rick?
I'm saying it's already there. My understanding from the application I saw, they have to have ordinance listing there for the people to look at. People are coming here because it's party time and they're not going to look at it, and they don't, because we wouldn't be having all these troubles if they did. And I guess the basic problem I have with it all is this is a business in a residential district, and I don't understand why this is allowed. You know, I bought a house in a residential area because I wanted neighbors, I wanted a neighborhood. Now I've got a hotel next door to me with different people there all the time. I don't know how to react to them. I never locked my house, I never locked my car. And now I have to lock everything because I just don't know what's going on. So why is a business allowed to operate in a residential district?
What's your recommendation specifically then, Rick? Just as long as you're standing and
Well,
giving us your input.
I think that there needs to be a section of the city set up to be short-term rentals. Put them all in one area where it's not disturbing residences
Okay.
and it's not destroying the neighborhood with traffic and trash and everything else.
And who gets to decide that?
That's your job.
Oh, okay. All right.
You know,
Big-
there's,
big bucks.
and, you know, to me, it's a land use change and it should have been approved by the neighborhood.
All right.
Because it's going from a single family residence to multiple families living there. And in my understanding, again, of the downtown business district, if you're gonna do a land use change, you've got to get approval from everybody. I just think the same thing should be happening here. You know, getting a letter after they've done it for a year saying, we might rent this out occasionally. It's only occasionally because people aren't renting. It's available on their website 365 days a year. So I just don't think a business belongs in a residential district. They're licensed, so that means they're a business. They pay taxes on it. They advertise, they're doing business out of it. There are other short terms that are true bed and breakfast where the person is on residence, provides meals and guidance for everybody. There's no problems with those. I don't see a problem with that. A B&B, a true B&B is one thing, but these Airbnbs are just, this is a motel with nobody there.
So just to clarify, you'd be okay if bed and breakfast was next to your house?
Yes, if it was an on-site owner there, providing meals like they should for a bread and breakfast and providing guidance, being a chaperone. I don't have any trouble with the real B&B. It's an Airbnb and a vacation rental. They're not supervised and they're disruptive. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. The question of, you know, I know from the insurer's standpoint, from a lending standpoint, they haven't really identified these as businesses. Is it a general rule of zoning that renting is part of a residential use and that is why they're not deemed commercial in a legal sense? Has that really been the crux of the whole thing?
Yes, and that's the crux of the dilemma of the use, because some people think it's a business, some people think, no, it's just a family occupying a home on a short-term basis. And thus, that's why the state legislature is having such a hard time sorting this out, because there's lobbyists on each side that are arguing the issue. And there's these arguments going on in a lot of municipalities through the state and through the country about, is it a business or is it just a home being rented out? So, you know, some people regulate it, some people don't. And it's a tough issue. It's a tough issue. So it's not that one has a stronger side than the other. It's just they balance a lot. And there's a lot of people on one side and a lot of people on the other. And it's causing problems in a lot of communities.
There's not case law that where any court is really deemed whether these are commercial or residential.
No, not that I know of.
In Michigan, no. In some other states, there have been some state Supreme Court rulings. But that's kind of based on that. That's why there's current legislation in Michigan to make it a by right use.
Sir, have you had to contact the police for issues? This sounds like your neighbor. Have you had to ask chief for help?
No, I haven't, because I've heard of another person that called with a short-term rental and they went in person and they were met with an AK-47
Here?
Yes. And so I am not brave enough to call 911 on a bunch of drunks in the backyard.
I would say our chief and his staff though are really responsive and are
Yeah,
very
but
good at
still, they come,
refusing.
they make their statement and they leave, and that leaves me vulnerable to all these people. And I have no idea what to expect from them. All I know is they're drunk and partying and loud. And what I did was I sent letters and photos to Mr. Grimm and tried to document all the problems I had with it. And after doing it for a year, I was told I had to put a timestamp on it. And otherwise it wasn't any good. So it's been a frustration.
Thank you.
Well, I would like to just offer one thought, really right here on Main Street, right across the street from the rentals and people are doing it all the time. The issues that he's describing sometimes could be at least mitigated some if you knew who was there. And I didn't see anything at all where the city's not going to know who's actually renting a house. Now, the landlord knows who it is. They've got their money, they've got their ID, I assume. They're not just saying, anybody wants a credit card to get in. And so at least there'd be some responsible person so that if there were issues, you could address them later, and the landlords can know. And in the rental, it sounds like your rental ordinance, my wife and I own rentals, no short-term rentals, none in the city, all downstate. We pay license fees. The city inspects them. Marine City, Michigan, they inspect our house every year. We come and make sure there's smoke detectors, make sure that there's fire extinguisher, things like that. And the fee covers that. But if you do, for these short-term rentals, if you knew somebody who was there, I think it's much easier to do bad things in darkness. People don't know who you are. You know who they are. It's much easier to say, hey, Andrew Bowman rented that house. You're kind of responsible for what's going on in that house. So when the chief does get a complaint, even Monday or Tuesday, you can go out there, maybe an issue disorderly person ticket or something like that. So he's right about cash cows. I'm shocked to see, I see the houses across the street, they go for $1,000 a night. But people come in and rent them for like a week. Or there's one house that rents for 2 months at a time. It's over $30,000 in rent. Big money's coming in, and bigger money than a lot of the businesses in town are making. So he's right. It is a business. Larry's right. People have a right to rent their homes. But I think the more information you can get from people about who's there, not from the landlord, who's there, and what would be wrong with saying, hey, as part of the requirement, we need to know when it's rented and who you rent it to. I don't think, send us an email. They know who it is. That's a thought.
And that is one, I think some of the other towns, the ordinances that we've reviewed, they do have, it's the onus is on the landlord to provide notices to who's, or a responsible party has to be identified for each rental period. And that's something that we feel is, potentially a good idea, but again, for our January, for the licensing term, we're under, but it is a good idea. And that's one that is on the list of sort of bigger ideas, along with how many, and some of that comes, the number with the thing with how many is always, okay, well, you write 8 is the maximum. How do you know who's there, who's not? But, there's certainly the experiences that you've been having up on State Street happen. A lot of people who are renting, if they're looking online and they see that it's a 4-person rental, they don't try to cram 8 in there. But there are definitely people that will. So it's just one more thing to sort of hit them with if they do get into violation. So
I do have to say, full disclosure, I have a short-term rental here in town. It's in the B1 district. And, knocking on wood, we've had very good luck with the people we've had in there. We haven't had any of the issues that you've described. I know what you're saying is correct, but we haven't. And we've had families come through. We limit the amount of people who are in there. It's limited to 4 maximum. It's stated very clearly, and no one's ever has exceeded that or taken advantage of it. But we have our own parking, we have our own garbage thing, so we're it's a different setup. But I think if it's done well, it can work. But there does have to be controls and limits, especially in a residential neighborhood. I think in a B1 or more commercial setting, it's more acceptable. You don't have a neighbor right on top of you and all that kind of stuff. But I do think along the lines of identifying who's there, and limiting the number of people, I don't know if the city can actually do that. We talked about the occupancy issue earlier. That'd be very difficult to
It's
figure out a
enforcement,
mechanism for
Yeah,
that.
it's tough. I was hoping there's something just on the occupancy permit for every resident. But, and again, we want to sort of stay on the items. And I think so many of the complaints or the issues that have been raised have been about the small percentage of people who do misbehave or landlord or owners, landlords that don't act responsibly. And that was sort of, we thought, the immediacy of the deadline of when the licenses start renewing, to take these sort of behavioral issues and deal with them as fast as we
Yeah,
could.
see, all this looks good to me as someone who has one of these
Yeah.
things, that all looks very reasonable to me.
Yeah.
But you have to ask this question, can I vote on this, or I have a vested interest in this, so I probably have to.
We may not even be looking for a vote tonight. We may just
I
be
think
looking
that-
for assent to.
I don't know that you have if you're usually conflict of interest, we're potentially building a unit that could be rented short term, could be rented long term. So I may be the same issue. I think, I think the definition of a conflict is a direct financial benefit from the action. I think it'd be a hard, and what we've done in the past is opened it up to the planning commission and sort of said, if somebody feels they're, disclose it and say, do you feel this is a conflict?
I think you're speaking as a citizen, Mark. I don't see it as a conflict myself. I don't. No, you're an owner and I think you have a right to your opinion and the suggestion, so I don't see a problem. Maybe somebody disagrees.
On these right now, this recommendation would not be voting on any specific thing other than to have council direct staff to look into these things. So we're not actually creating an ordinance. I think if it comes to passing some sort of ordinance, we'll just relook at our bylaws just to make sure, so you're comfortable whether or not you should accuse yourself or not.
And I've had the same thought, even in the subcommittee. I've said at the beginning of every subcommittee meeting, I may or may not eventually be the owner of one of these. So but it's, I think that any landlord that I have talked to, that has approached me has been in favor, frankly, of some rules like this. And I haven't had any owners of properties come in and say, there's a concern whether they're going to be, eliminated completely or heavily limited in number. But I think even the feedback we had during the public forum, there were a lot of owners there, landlords there, and none of them were saying don't increase your rules or enforce the rules you already have, to keep, because they want to keep doing what they're doing.
It won't affect anybody who's running a good rental.
And Mark, just to clarify also, generally when it comes to policy issues, you don't need to recuse yourself. It's usually when you have a specific project, a specific case that's going to the board that, like Andy said, it impacts you financially like that. So policy issues, there is interesting, so we can talk about it afterwards when it actually comes up. We go through the planning bylaws, just so you're comfortable with making that decision yourself.
And I did ask the question in what sort of as the subcommittee, what was the intention? And I think the advice from staff was that we do, Victor, I think you made the point that in order for, this recommendation would be to, we're recommending to city council that they ask staff, and that translates, I believe, into spending money on, time is money. So their time developing this first response sort of table that we've laid out, and otherwise they couldn't necessarily, staff couldn't just start doing it without direction from city council. So we are looking for a motion, but it's really just to direct that city council direct staff to
Procedural.
Yeah. Does that make sense in the world's worst explanation?
And
So
then the hope would be that by raising the fees, then we would recover the cost, time, and stuff that we spend going forward with implementing this.
any other comments, public or otherwise? Anyone online? Max still awake?
Max, you have anything to say?
On TikTok, is he?
No, I'm good.
Good. All right. Thanks. Voice of reason.
You do have a motion and a support on the floor right now.
Yeah, we do have Jack's motion.
Oh, sorry. Did we have a motion?
And do we,
Jack's to support the recommendations going forward.
Right, yeah. And I don't know if we had a support of the motion.
Yes, you did.
Yes.
George.
Yeah.
A second was from George.
Yeah, George.
Thank you, I missed that. So we had a good long discussion of motion. Would you like a roll call or an all in favor?
Let's do a roll call just for drama.
All right. Vanessa Warren,
Yes.
Emily DeBay,
Yes.
Jack Deegan.
Yes.
George P.
Yes.
Bill Mulder,
Yes.
Mark Beday,
Yes.
Andrew Bowman,
Yes.
Al Dyken.
Yes.
Motion passes. We will take this to city council.
There you go.
One request, when it is presented to council, is that it be accompanied by as much data as we have, how many current short-term rentals we have, how many complaints we've had, just to provide some context, because I know it will be requested.
And just so we all remember that on the agenda for November 18th, so the next meeting, you'll see some discussion of these bigger ideas. So I am going to fully disclose right now that I'll be out of town.
We gonna have another subcommittee meeting before then to formulate these more, or?
I don't know that.
No, I think,
I think we'd like to, that was sort of the thought, is that subcommittee sort of ran it as far as we could, and then bring it here distilled down and organized, thanks to Bill, not me, and then go from there.
Andrew, could I address the members of the audience just for a minute?
Sure.
And the members of the community, people who may be listening. I want you to know that the planning commission does hear what you're saying. We do understand the issues. We are interested in taking it to the next step. We'll do that in a thoughtful way. We're going to need a lot more input, a lot more ideas. So hang in with us. Let's do this well, and let's do this in a way that's going to work.
Any member comments? We're adjourned.
Yeah.
I told you you couldn't go to the next president, I couldn't bring her up.
Oh, yeah.
They said, well, if you go, just come down to City Hall afterward, I'll drive you home. You may have to wait. No, I may have to wait.
He does give a lot of.
It's very.
Yeah.
Requested.